Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. We're going to kick off this week with a very busy Monday, and we begin at the White House, where we're now in day 68 of the Biden administration. The president continuing to tout the rollout of the COVID vaccines, which we should note are way ahead of schedule.
I'm directing my COVID team to ensure there is a vaccine site within 5 miles of 90% of all Americans by April the 19th, 3 weeks from today.
So this vaccine rollout, it is the issue where the president is getting the highest marks. That's according to a brand new numbers coming out from ABC News. That new poll, it shows that more than 7 in 10 Americans approve of Biden's handling of COVID. 3/4 happy with the vaccine distribution, 6 in 10 approving of his handling when it comes to the economy. But the numbers, they're underwater for two of the other major issues facing this country, gun violence and the situation at the border. So far, nearly 130 million Americans, they've received their stimulus payments, and now the president is setting his sights when it comes to the next big thing, his $3 trillion infrastructure and economic relief plan. It includes all of the things you see right there on your screen, including extending some of the poverty relief programs that were in the stimulus package. But as you can see, its main focus, it's roads, bridges, rail lines, airports, and all the other things desperately needed in fixing in this country. President, he's heading to Pittsburgh this Wednesday to unveil the package, and top Democrats, they're speaking out about it ahead of the Wednesday visit.
I put out called upon my chairs of the committees of jurisdiction to reach out to the Republicans to see what we can do, as we have traditionally done, in a bipartisan way. This is about broadband, it's about water systems, it's about mass transit, it's about good paying jobs.
Speaker Pelosi talking about working across the aisle, but if you listen to Mitch McConnell, sounds like that's going to be a long shot at best, at least when it comes to the Senate.
I think the Trojan horse will be called infrastructure, but inside the Trojan horse will be all the tax increases that Senator Scott and others have been talking about. My suspicion is they will try to jam everything they can into that bill and call it an infrastructure bill. I don't think there's going to be any enthusiasm on our side for a tax increase.
And for more, let's bring in our guest, Bill Richardson, former Democratic U.S. Congressman, one-time governor of New Mexico, also U.S. ambassador to the UN and Secretary of Energy under President Bill Clinton. And Governor, as always, I really appreciate the time. And before we get to the border and the challenges the Biden administration, let's go to the Capitol and everything still, we're in the overhang of what happened January 6th. I'm curious, what was going through your mind that day? And do you think that it's the shock to the system that people understood, if you get that close to the flame, we can burn this country? Or do you think these lessons still have yet to be learned?
Well, I was totally flabbergasted. I served in the Congress for 15 years. What occurred was unimaginable. And my main concern was not just the lack of security, but the divisiveness that has existed in this country to prompt such a violent response. Yes, I think the president agitated, but at the same time, this has been percolating as a country. So I was enormously shocked, and I think it's very important that the Congress establish this Capitol January 6th commission to look at some of the endemic causes and the responsibility of those that made this happen, because we can't just let it pass. There's a ferment out there of division, of violence that could occur again, and we have to get to the bottom of this.
But it seemed to me, Governor, that there was an opportunity, and it was articulated by McConnell. Sure, he didn't vote for impeachment as a half a dozen of his colleagues did, but at the end, he said, this is a bridge too far for me. This is, the president owns this, talking about Trump, and this isn't who we are. But I've looked at a lot of other Republican leadership since then. I've seen the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world here and others fighting for this space. I'm not sure Republicans really have gotten to the point where they can quit Trump, or even, literally the treasonous sedition that we saw on that day. How concerned are you that they really haven't learned their lesson?
Well, I don't believe they've learned the lesson. And the problem is that the Republican Party has been radicalized. And you're talking to somebody that's a moderate, a centrist. I reached across the aisle throughout my career. But what you see with the Republican Party on the voting issue right now, keeping people from voting, making it a national effort, means that the Trump wing of extremism is totally dominant in the Republican Party. And Mitch McConnell may be a moderate within that, trying to keep up, trying to keep his leadership. So my worry is the radicalization of the Republican Party, not one supporting the stimulus package, now these voting right challenges around the country. So, yeah, I'm extremely concerned. And this is why I think President Biden, his tone, his measured tone, his talk of reconciliation, of unity, of bipartisanship, although it's not being reciprocated at all, is the right tone to set for the country.
To that end, I've spoken to people close who said that Biden really believes that he can find a partner if he reaches across the aisle, but yet we're hearing talks about ending the filibuster. You see some folks at Biden saying the lesson he learned from Obama is all gas, no brakes in the beginning. In addition to stimulus, they're talking about infrastructure to the tune of $3 trillion and other big ticket packages, even with really no margin for error with a 50-50 split in the Senate. What's your take? How big do you think Biden is planning to go, and should he?
Well, I think he's going big, and he should. Bipartisanship is not being reciprocated. And I think he has the ability, because of his 30 years as a senator, 8 as vice president, he knows the system. And I think looking at the filibuster, I think it is possible to carve out certain votes in the filibuster that would give the president his big goals of dealing with immigration, of dealing with gun violence, of dealing with an infrastructure package. But at the same time, I think it's important that he recognize that he is in a Rooseveltian situation where if he goes big like he did on the stimulus, it was something that was in jeopardy, but he got it done. So I think he can be a transformational president if he continues, yes, trying to find some accommodation with Republicans, but don't expect it to happen. But then at the same time, be realistic, use the system, carve out certain votes in the filibuster that might be possible in terms of judicial reform, in terms of reconciliation packages that allow votes on issues like gun violence, like an issue relating to infrastructure, our grid, our highways, public-private partnerships. I think he needs to be as bold as he has been. I hope he doesn't retrench there.
On guns, you got 93% of Americans who can agree on basically nothing, but they can agree that background checks, universal background checks, are at least what we ought to have. You know, if you're Biden, do you need this fight right now? Should you go there? Because you're probably not going to get any Republican support if you do.
Well, I know the president was criticized by some of the gun advocates for not making it an immediate issue, but I think he's right. Pick your fights. Bring up the gun issue soon, but first, infrastructure. You know, as a Hispanic former governor, I want to see the immigration issue. I want to see an issue dealing with the dreamers, with a legal status for those that have been here for years. I want to see those as my priorities. But I think you have to pick your fights. He knows what works. I think bipartisanship is more possible on an infrastructure bill. And we need that, especially with the grid. As a former energy secretary, the grid that fell apart in Texas, we need to modernize our grid. We need to move it towards renewable energy and climate change.
Up next, we'll continue our conversation with the governor, and we'll talk about the situation at the border and also foreign policy and whether or not President Biden's been able to patch things up with allies who are alienated by Donald Trump.